I acquired a $50,000 house using the elderly man's funds, and Vivian proudly displayed her bank book, boasting about the purchase. Despite my attempts to maintain composure and avoid surprise, laughter overcame me. In response to her inquiry about my amusement, I continued laughing openly. The eldest son's wife seemingly aimed to leave me speechless, but instead of retorting, I chuckled unabashedly before regaining my composure. I looked at her, and with a touch of sympathy, uttered, "Sorry for you. My name is Rita, and since marrying my husband, who is a decade my senior, I've been a subject of gossip. He was already affluent, owning multiple companies and substantial wealth. Marrying a significantly older man, especially one with such financial standing, led people to assume I was after his money. However, I genuinely never coveted his wealth. In reality, my husband grew up in poverty after his father's disappearance due to gambling. Living in the same apartment complex where I was the landlord's daughter, we became childhood companions. As a child, I confessed my feelings to him, only to be rejected with laughter and a promise to reconsider when I was older. Even when he moved to New York, we continued corresponding. Despite my repeated confessions, he maintained the stance that I was too young. Our communication persisted even through high school, where he expressed surprise at my continued affection. Upon graduating high school and starting university, I confessed once more, receiving a response that he'd consider my confession once I broadened my perspectives in university. Throughout my 4 university years, my feelings for him remained unwavering. Upon graduation, I confessed again, and this time, he bashfully acknowledged my consistent love. At 23, I began working while he, at 33, garnered attention for his thriving business ventures in New York. Eager to marry, he promised to do so once his company achieved success. Living together at the time, I diligently attended to household chores and prepared his favorite meals, awaiting his return. There were moments of doubt about his feelings, but when questioned, he admitted to initially considering my affection a childhood crush. Surprised by my persistent confessions in high school and college, he began to feel shy and self-aware of his feelings. Despite concerns during my college years that I might find someone else, he assured me he had no time for romance due to intense focus on studying and overcoming his impoverished background. Both of us remained confident that we would never betray each other. We always had a harmonious relationship, even amidst the news of various couples in our circle going through divorces. The concept of divorce seemed distant and irrelevant to us. With my husband amassing a $12 million fortune, some people, aware of our 10-year age gap, assumed I married him for his wealth or speculated about insurance benefits upon his demise. While some understood our long history together since my infancy and didn't jump to such conclusions, there were those who stubbornly clung to misguided beliefs. Despite the occasional gossip during social gatherings, where people assumed my husband had never experienced poverty and unfairly judged us based on societal assumptions about privilege, I remained unfazed. Whenever I noticed disapproving looks from my husband, I'd simply advise him to smile and brush off the rumors. Our love stood steadfast, unaffected by external opinions. My husband had complete trust in me, choosing to believe in our bond regardless of the skepticism around us. Several years into our marriage, we welcomed our eldest son, Peter, followed by the arrival of our second son, Dan, the following year. As a family of 4, we enjoyed financial comfort, yet my husband and I decided not to disclose our wealth to Peter and Dan. Instead, we taught them the value of money from a young age. In elementary school, they earned 10 cents for assisting with household chores, received a monthly allowance of $1, and managed their finances through piggy banks and account books. Despite our financial stability, we instilled in them the unpredictability of the world and the importance of financial responsibility. Both Peter and Dan, influenced by our approach, learned to respect each other's interests. By the time they reached high school, instead of asking for pocket money, they expressed a desire to work for what they wanted. Peter took a job at a cafe, while Dan found employment at a bookstore. My husband and I eagerly anticipated their futures, sharing in the excitement of discovering the kind of people they would eventually choose as life partners. When I mentioned the possibility of them choosing same-gender partners or opting for a single life, my husband laughed, agreeing that their happiness was paramount. We shared a heartfelt laugh, acknowledging our simple wish for our son's happiness, not anticipating the surprise that awaited us when our eldest son expressed his intention to marry someone that left us exclaiming, "You're marrying her? I want to introduce you to the woman I have been dating, Dad. Mom and Dan. I'm considering marrying her in the future. Even after Peter and Dan graduated from university, started working, and moved out of the family home, we made it a point to have a family dinner once a month. During one of these dinners, Peter announced his decision, and both Rita, my husband, and Dan were already in a celebratory mood, expressing excitement about meeting her. That evening, Peter brought the woman in question to our house. Upon entering, she marveled at our home, expressing aspirations of living in such a fantastic house someday. She exclaimed how wonderful it was, and Peter watched her with a fond smile. When we greeted them, she introduced herself as Vivian, mentioning that she works as a model, although she uses a stage name. Curious, she asked if we knew her, and I admitted that I occasionally glance at magazines but don't pay much attention to the models. She nodded in understanding, suggesting that I might be too old to be familiar with the magazines she appears in. I was taken aback when she added that I might not read the kind of magazine she features in, given my age. Despite the initial shock, I realized she probably didn't mean any harm and was merely making a casual observation. She then asked if my marriage was arranged, to which I replied no, explaining that Peter and I had a love marriage. Vivian, in turn, shared that she and Peter also had a love marriage. Surprisingly, she questioned the longevity of our relationship, considering the 10-year age gap. Sensing a comparison between the lengths of our romances, I pointed out the futility of such comparisons and emphasized that we had a love marriage, just like she and Peter. However, she seemed skeptical and brought up the topic of money, insinuating that we might be pretending for financial reasons. Peter intervened, asserting that our parents had a genuine love marriage, evident in the way they are together. This seemed to halt Vivian's line of questioning. When Peter took Vivian home, my husband and Dan were shocked by her remarks, leaving them too stunned to say anything. In the aftermath, my brother's choice of a potential life partner left them appalled and questioning if he would really marry someone with such an attitude. He's a high earner. There must be plenty of other nice women out there. Dan, visibly concerned about his brother, was holding his head. I patted his shoulder, offering reassurance. It's okay, Dan. Peter wasn't endorsing her behavior, was he? He wasn't overlooking her remarks. He must have plans to handle her if they get married. He must genuinely love her to choose her over all the other nice women out there. Despite the complexity of their expressions, my husband and Dan seemed to agree with my words. Our family decided to celebrate the marriage of Peter and Vivian. However, even after the marriage was decided, Vivian made a demand. Since you're the groom's family, you should give a gift of $10,000 per person. Peter silenced her, stating that the standard amount was sufficient. He explained, if we receive that much, it'll look like I'm not earning anything, which calmed down and agitated Vivian simultaneously. As long as Peter kept a firm hand on her, we hoped they could build a good home. My husband Dan and I decided not to worry about their household. Time passed and my husband eventually passed away due to illness and aging. By that time, those who had once thought I married him for his wealth had come to see me as a devoted wife. At the funeral, no one looked at me suspiciously. However, one person's eyes were shining with excitement. Vivian, Peter's wife. She didn't say anything at the funeral, but soon after, she came to our house flaunting a bank book. I've always been stopped by Peter, but this time he agreed with my plan, so it's the end for you now. Confused by her words, I burst into laughter upon seeing the bank book. With that bank book, I bought a house for $500,000 with the old man's money. Watching Vivian proudly show off the bank book, I couldn't help but burst into laughter, realizing the huge mistake she had made based on her words and the bank book in her hand. Despite my efforts to keep calm and not be surprised since my husband's death, I couldn't contain my laughter. When Vivian asked why I was laughing so much, expecting defeat, I just laughed in front of her. After finally stopping my laughter, I looked at her and said, "Sorry for you, huh?" She didn't seem to understand, so I pointed at the bank book in her hand. Look at the name carefully. Confused, she realized it was Peter's bank book. Bursting into laughter again, I couldn't help but find humor in the mix-up. I clarified, the first character of Peter's name and my husband Paul's name are the same, right? As I laughed, Vivian, embarrassed, pleaded not to be laughed at. She had mistakenly thought it was her father-in-law's bank book and even borrowed his ID from a black bag at the funeral. However, it turned out the bag belonged to her own husband, Peter. Despite the mix-up, I managed to buy a house for $500,000 with it. When Vivian questioned if I had $500,000 to borrow a house, I responded, "Well, Peter was with me, so I had him do it." I found the situation increasingly hilarious. Vivian discovered a bank book in her husband Peter's bag, and it seemed she suggested buying a house with the account holder, Peter. Judging by the amount in the bank book, she proposed buying a $500,000 house. Since Peter and Vivian were living in an apartment, Peter might have thought it was time to invest in a house. For Peter, it was merely buying a house with his earned money, but Vivian mistakenly thought it was my husband's bank book and believed she could use it. Not being the account holder, I thought it might be the bank book with my husband's insurance money. The beneficiary of my husband's insurance was me, and normally you can't use the account of someone who has passed away, right? Vivian's face turned red at my words. Then Peter and Vivian's parents appeared at our house. "Ah, I thought you'd be here," Peter said nonchalantly as Vivian's parents, looking pale, came to me, bowing repeatedly. They apologized for their daughter's rudeness. As I was surprised, Vivian's parents explained what had happened. After Peter and Vivian decided to buy a house and completed the contract, an excited Vivian texted her mother, saying, "Got a mansion with the dead father-in-law's insurance money. I'll invite you over once we move in." Now I'm going to brag to the money-hungry mother-in-law about buying a house with the money she was supposed to get. In a panic, her mother showed the message to her father, and they both contacted Peter in a hurry. Peter calmed them down, saying, "Ah, I see," and brought them to our house. I always kept an eye on Vivian, expecting her to mess up sometimes, but I never thought she'd mix up my bank book with Dad's. I didn't think she'd make such a blunder. Peter laughed as much as I did when he realized Vivian's mistake. Vivian's parents told her to apologize, their faces still pale. But Peter and I continued to laugh, creating a chaotic scene. Once we stopped laughing, Vivian's parents apologized and said, "We're truly sorry for what our daughter did." Seeing her parents flustered, Vivian also apologized to us. "Oh, it's all right. In the end, I haven't suffered any harm," I told Vivian and her parents, but they insisted on apologizing. "We know you two had a love marriage and were together before your husband built his fortune. We saw your husband on a TV program talking about how you two met. My wife and I were so moved by your love story," Vivian's parents explained. I exclaimed in surprise as I didn't know anything about it. Peter, sitting next to me, said, "Ah, I thought Mom didn't know." Dad couldn't stand seeing Mom misunderstood, so he talked about it everywhere, and it reached the ears of a TV station. They thought it was a great story and broadcasted how Mom and Dad met. Was that what he was asking about a few years ago when he wanted to tell people our story? "Ah, I guess you did give the okay. I thought it was just for casual conversation." As my face turned as red as Vivian's, who was still embarrassed by her blunder, I realized the legacy my husband had left behind. Our daughter had caused such a disgrace. "If Peter wants to divorce her after this," Peter, looking puzzled, replied, "What? I have no intention of divorcing her even after what she did. Like Mom said, there was no harm done, and I would have stopped her if it looked like there would be. I married her, including her occasional blunders, because I love her. I'll take responsibility for her actions, so please don't worry." Peter said this with a refreshing smile. Vivian hugged him, and her parents were in awe, praising Peter for his kindness. When Dan, the younger son, heard about it later, he said, "I just can't understand my brother's thinking," looking skyward. When I asked Peter why he loved her so much, he said, laughing, "She's never boring to watch." Remembering how he made me laugh during my grief after my husband's death, I felt I understood what he meant. Being with her probably meant no time for minor worries or sulking. Though Vivian did what she did, she's been without an allowance for a while and recently started working at my favorite cafe. Whether she was embarrassed by how much I laughed at her, scolded by her parents, or heard in detail about mine and my husband's love story from them, I'm not sure. But lately she's been calling me ma'am and treating me more respectfully. For a while, I think I'll continue visiting this cafe, watching Peter's wife grow and change.